What if a rocket was never supposed to survive and it did anyway? What if that single unexpected moment turned into one of the strangest journeys in the history of a spaceflight? Somewhere in the middle of the Indian Ocean, a massive piece of SpaceX hardware refused to sink, refused to break apart, and refused to disappear. For 24 days, it drifted alone, thousands of miles from home. And the question everyone is now asking is simple. Where is Ship 40 actually going next? This is the story of how one rocket's failure to explode turned into one of SpaceX's most unusual challenges yet, and why the answer to that question could shape the future of Starship itself. To understand why Ship 40 matters so much, you first need to understand what SpaceX has been trying to build for years. Starship is not just another rocket. It is the largest and most powerful launch vehicle ever constructed, designed with one goal in mind: to be fully reusable. Instead of throwing away expensive hardware after every single flight, the way almost every rocket in history has done, SpaceX wants Starship to fly, land, get refueled, and fly again over and over, the same way an airplane does. That single idea, if it truly works, could change spaceflight forever. It could make trips to orbit dramatically cheaper. It could support massive satellite constellations. It could even become the vehicle NASA uses to land astronauts back on the moon. But before any of that can happen, SpaceX has to prove something much simpler first. It has to prove that Starship can survive the trip home. That brings us to July 24th, 2026, the day everything changed. On that evening, at Starbase in South Texas, SpaceX prepared to launch its 13th full test flight of the Starship system. This was not the first attempt. An earlier launch date on July 16th had to be scrubbed at the very last second, when 4 of the vehicle's 33 engines failed to start properly. SpaceX's own safety rules required at least 31 working engines before liftoff was allowed. Engineers pulled the rocket back, replaced the faulty engines, and then had to wait out a tropical storm before trying again. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. When Flight 13 finally launched, it carried something the previous test flights never had. Tucked inside the upper stage, known as Ship 40, were 20 brand new Starlink satellites, the next generation version SpaceX has been developing. This was the very first time fully functional. Next generation satellites had ever flown aboard a Starship test mission. It meant this flight was not just about testing hardware, it was about proving Starship could actually start doing useful work in space. The launch itself went smoothly. Ship 40 separated from its massive booster, climbed higher, and successfully released its cargo of satellites into a suborbital trajectory. Engineers watched as the ship then completed something called a Raptor relight, briefly reigniting its engines while still in space, a critical test for future missions that will require restarting engines far from Earth. Then came the part nobody could predict. As Ship 40 began its descent back toward the Indian Ocean, it had to survive one of the most dangerous phases of the entire flight, atmospheric reentry. This is the moment when a spacecraft plunges back through Earth's atmosphere at incredible speed, generating temperatures hot enough to melt most materials on the planet. Previous Starship test flights had struggled during this phase, with heat shield tiles cracking, burning away, or failing entirely. This time was different. Ship 40 came through re-entry intact. It performed a landing burn, igniting 3 engines to slow itself down, then shutting them off one by one in a perfect sequence. 3 engines, then 2, then 1, exactly as planned. It touched down gently on the surface of the ocean, upright, in what SpaceX would later describe as the softest splashdown the program had ever achieved. What happened next changed everything. In every previous Starship test, once the upper stage touched the water, it would tip over onto its side and break apart within minutes, sinking beneath the waves. That was the expected outcome. That was what always happened. But this time, when Ship 40 tipped over, it did not break apart. It stayed whole. It remained floating on the surface of the Indian Ocean, fully intact, still transmitting live telemetry and video data back to SpaceX through the Starlink satellite network. Elon Musk shared footage online almost immediately, showing the enormous spacecraft resting calmly on the water, still in one piece. For a company that had spent years watching its test vehicles explode, crumble, or sink, this was something entirely new. Engineers finally had a real, physical Starship that had completed a full flight and re-entry, sitting right there on the ocean surface, ready to be studied up close. But that wasn't the biggest surprise either. Nobody at SpaceX had actually planned for this outcome. The company had never intended to recover this particular vehicle. It was meant to be discarded in the ocean after the test, the same as every ship before it. Now, suddenly, they had a genuine dilemma. Should they simply let this historic piece of hardware sink and disappear, the way every other test vehicle had? Or should they attempt something that had never been done before, hauling an enormous 171-foot-tall spacecraft across thousands of miles of open ocean back to the United States? SpaceX chose to try. A recovery ship called Go Australis was already stationed nearby, and it moved in to begin monitoring the floating vehicle. But keeping a massive, unpowered spacecraft steady in the open ocean is nowhere near as simple as it sounds. Ship 40 weighed an enormous amount, was awkward in shape, and had never been designed to be towed anywhere. Every hour it remained in the water, the risk of structural damage increased. The truth was even more shocking than most people realized. As the days passed, weather conditions in the region grew worse. Recovery teams described facing what SpaceX itself called challenging conditions and increasingly rough seas. High ocean swells created a genuine risk that the spacecraft's structure could fail entirely, especially in the days between August 8th and August 9th, when conditions were considered particularly dangerous. At one point, Elon Musk himself posted publicly that things were, in his words, not looking good, warning that Starship could ultimately be lost at sea despite surviving its flight. Then investigators uncovered something nobody expected. Satellite imagery from a private geospatial company began capturing the entire operation from above. These images showed small boats maneuvering next to the enormous floating spacecraft, with a line attached near its nose, slowly beginning the process of towing it through open water. Ship tracking data confirmed that recovery vessels, including one called Normand Ranger, were moving at incredibly slow speeds, sometimes as little as 1 knot, broadcasting that they had restricted maneuverability due to the size and awkwardness of what they were hauling. This was not a quick operation. It was a slow, careful, and genuinely uncertain fight against the ocean itself. For 24 days, Ship 40 drifted and was towed through the Indian Ocean, watched constantly by SpaceX engineers, tracked by satellites, and followed by space enthusiasts around the world who could hardly believe what they were seeing. A rocket, floating, alive with data, refusing to give up. Finally, on August 18, 2026, SpaceX confirmed a major milestone. After nearly a month at sea, the recovery team had successfully guided Ship 40 into calmer waters near Christmas Island, a small Australian territory located in the eastern Indian Ocean. Officials quickly established a 500-meter exclusion zone around the vehicle and its support ships, keeping other boat traffic safely away, while engineers prepared for a closer inspection. This moment mattered enormously, and here is why. Every single Starship test flight before this one had ended the same way, with the upper stage destroyed either during reentry or shortly after splashdown. That meant engineers only ever had data, numbers on a screen, sensor readings, video footage. They never had the actual physical hardware to study afterward. Ship 40 changed that completely. For the first time ever, SpaceX had a real Starship upper stage that had flown to space, survived a full reentry, and come home in one piece. This gave engineers an extraordinary opportunity. They could now directly examine the heat shield tiles that protected the vehicle from re-entry temperatures, checking for cracks, gaps, or weaknesses that numbers alone could never fully reveal. They could inspect the engines, the structural welds, and the overall condition of a vehicle that had actually been to space and back, rather than relying purely on simulations and remote sensor data. According to some analysts following the recovery closely, prolonged exposure to salt water during those 24 days at sea had likely caused serious damage to Ship 40's internal systems, engines, and structure. That means the vehicle is extremely unlikely to ever fly again. But that was never really the point. The value of Ship 40 now lies almost entirely in what engineers can learn by studying it up close, hardware that endured a genuine flight to space and a real re-entry, something no previous Starship prototype had ever offered. So where is Ship 40 actually headed next? For now, it remains anchored in the sheltered waters off Christmas Island, while a team of SpaceX engineers travels to the site to conduct detailed analysis in calm conditions. This closer inspection is expected to guide the next major decision, whether or how to attempt bringing the vehicle all the way back to Starbase in Texas for even more comprehensive examination. That final journey will not be easy. Some experts have pointed out that hauling a vehicle this size back to the United States by sea, at the slow pace recovery ships have managed so far, could realistically take over a year. SpaceX has not yet revealed exactly how it plans to solve that problem, whether through a different towing method, a specialized transport ship, or some other approach entirely. For now, that part of the story remains unclear. What is confirmed, however, is the bigger picture, and why this entire situation matters so much for the future of Starship. SpaceX's ultimate goal has never been simply to land a Starship safely in the ocean. The real objective is far more ambitious. The company wants Starship to return directly to the launch site and be caught in midair by giant mechanical arms on the launch tower, often nicknamed chopsticks. The same method SpaceX has already successfully demonstrated with the booster stage on earlier flights. Before attempting that kind of catch with a much larger and more fragile upper stage, engineers need overwhelming confidence that the heat shield can survive re-entry reliably every single time without cracking or failing. Ship 40's unexpectedly soft splashdown and its survival afterward is being seen by many in the industry as a meaningful sign that SpaceX's recent heat shield improvements are working better than ever before. It does not yet prove the system is perfect. It does not replace the need for future test flights or eventual recovery attempts, but it does provide something SpaceX has never had before: real physical proof, sitting in the ocean, that a Starship can come home in one piece. The consequences of this single event ripple far beyond one rocket bobbing in the waves near Australia. If SpaceX can eventually prove that Starship's upper stage can survive re-entry consistently and be safely recovered, it moves the entire program significantly closer to full and rapid reusability. That has enormous implications, not just for satellite launches like the Starlink deployment we saw on this very mission, but for much bigger ambitions as well, including NASA's plans to use a version of Starship to land astronauts on the moon under the Artemis program. Every additional piece of real flight data brings that future closer, and Ship 40, quite unexpectedly, just became one of the most valuable pieces of hardware in the entire program's history. Not because it worked perfectly, but because it refused to fall apart when it wasn't supposed to survive at all. There is something almost poetic about how this unfolded. SpaceX has spent years intentionally pushing Starship to its limits, expecting failures, learning from explosions, and slowly improving with every single test. Nobody planned for Ship 40 to become a long-term ocean survivor. Nobody expected a routine splashdown to turn into a 24-day rescue mission, followed by international media attention. But that is exactly what happened, and it may end up teaching engineers more than a perfect, uneventful flight ever could have. Right now, as engineers begin their close-up inspection near Christmas Island, the world is left waiting for the next update. Will SpaceX find a way to bring this historic vehicle all the way home to Texas? Will the data gathered from Ship 40 lead to changes that push the program closer to its ultimate goal of full reusability? Or will the ongoing saltwater damage mean this remarkable piece of hardware never leaves the Indian Ocean region at all? Nobody can say for certain yet. What we do know is this: a rocket that was never supposed to survive splashdown ended up drifting across an ocean, surviving rough seas, and giving engineers a once-in-a-program opportunity to study real flown hardware up close. Whatever happens next, Ship 40 has already earned its place in the story of how Starship slowly, imperfectly, and unexpectedly made its way toward becoming fully reusable. Sometimes, the most important breakthroughs do not come from things going exactly according to plan. Sometimes, they come from the moments nobody saw coming, the failures that refuse to behave like failures, and the rockets that simply will not sink. What do you think SpaceX should do with Ship 40 next? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed following this incredible story, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more updates as the Starship program continues to push toward the future of spaceflight.